3D pencil shading with Mr. Hansen. The first thing we want to do is look at our tools. We have a shading pencil, a sanding block, a sharpener, a stump, and a eraser. I like using these white erasers because it doesn't leave any pink marks like those pink erasers. This is a solid piece of paper that's blended and molded in. A nice sharpener. A sanding block is to sand the edge of your pencil if you want it really sharp, or to clean your eraser, or to clean your stump. So with that, and you can buy these tools from Walmart. You can buy them from Staples, Michaels, any art store that's around you. And this is part of the package that they sell. And this is a great toolkit here. It has charcoals, chalk pastels, eraser, blenders, a stump, sharpener, double sharpener for wide and narrow pencils, and you got shading pencils. Anyway, with that, we'll go ahead and get started. First thing I like to do is set up my values. When I teach shading, I always teach shading in layers and values. So I like to make a rectangle and divide it into 5 boxes. Now it doesn't have to be equal or precise. This works fine. The first box here, the value of shade, is what we call highlight. Highlight is the white of the paper. And then the next value is direct light. That's the value of light that hits the object that you're trying to shade. And the next one is reflected. That's just what it is, reflected light. It tells you exactly what it is. It's light that hits the table or the object that it's your shading object sitting on, and it bounces back up. And then the shadow. Now a lot of people think the shadow is the only part that goes on the table. And actually there's a shadow on the object and a shadow on the table. And then the last one is accent, which is our darkest value. And that's the value where the shadow that makes where it's sitting right next to the object. And we'll see how that works. And I do it in layers because layers allows you to blend from one value to the next value smoother. Okay, and so accent, I like having 8 layers, 6 layers on shadow, and 4 layers on reflected. So I'm going to take my pencil like this, let the weight of the pencil do all your work, and then you just go back and forth like this with your shading pencil. Now this shading pencil happens to be a 3B. Anytime you see the letter B on a pencil, that's a soft leaded, and that's what we use for shading. The other pencils that we use in school are a 2H, which is a hard pencil, and it's harder to blend those because the lead is so hard. Okay, so we have our values here of 8, and then we go to the shadow. Now the one thing I tell my students is don't worry if you happen to make the shadow value a little too dark. You can always go back to accent and darken it up. As long as you have these separate values, that's what's important. And reflected is 4. We just want to make sure that these values are separated. And direct light, I like using my finger, or you could use a blender. This is what it looks like if I use my finger. And if I take our blending stump and I get some graphite on it, and I use the edge, you got to be careful not to use the tip because the tip will make marks, and it's hard to blend those marks out. So that's our value line. This is called a value line in shading. The highlight is actually the white of the paper. So let's get started. We'll go ahead and I'll do a sphere, And to get a round circle, there's two ways. A lot of people like to use an object, like you can use a candle that's round, or you can use a cup. I like to try to freehand it. And the way I freehand draw is I use my whole arm. It allows me more movement. And you use the side of your pencil and just make a sphere. You're going to end up erasing your lines, and that's the whole idea of 3D shading. And then I'm going to do a little table line. And if I have the light coming down this direction, then it's going to cast a shadow out here. Oh, about like this. Okay, so the first value I want to talk about is the value that the light is hitting, and that's, remember what we said, is direct light. Okay, and that you can do with your finger or your blending stump, whatever one you feel that you can feel more comfortable with. Now notice that I'm arching. I'm making this arch here because in a sphere and in 3D shading, you got to remember that the object comes out and it goes back in. And so in 3D drawing, this is the way that we show that, by arching that. Then I'm going to take my eraser, and I like using the tip of my eraser, and I'm just going to erase that outside line. If you leave that outside line in, it doesn't look three-dimensional. It looks like a coloring book, you know, where you have a outside line, and then you can always go in there with your finger, or you can go in and tighten it up with a blender, making sure that edge is nice and smooth. But the more you practice, the better you get at it, and you figure it out yourself. There are a lot of ways. If you go on YouTube, there's a lot of ways that people shade. What's important is whatever way that you shade that you feel comfortable with. Okay, so there's my first value, which is my direct light. And like I said, with practice you get better and better. All right, let's go with the reflected light. Okay, reflected light is the light that bounces off of the table and onto your object. Okay, and that's going to happen right in this area. Now, the way that I teach is I use little circles, and use your wrist, and you blend it, and you're going to go across. Remember, layers, not pushing hard, but just doing layers. And the reason I do it up and down is because if I shade this way, and if I'm not careful, I'll go straight across. And if I go straight across, you're going to flatten out your object. And it's no longer going to be 3D. And so I always shade this way, up and down. And I work with the curve of the sphere, doing my layers, like so. Little circles, so you can make this really smooth by going in little circles and working your way across. Now, what I like to do is right here, I like to accent that curve again. Come in here and blend out. So we have a nice smooth transition between direct light and reflected light, see? And now I'm going to do right down in here where the darkest value on the object is going to be our shadow. Remember, this is where I was talking about you have a shadow on the object, and you also are going to have a shadow on the table. So now I'm going to finish it up. And you can come back in here and you can blend it in. You can erase. The main idea is that we show these three different values right here. And normally, if you're not filming like I am, you can turn the paper in the direction that you're shading if you want. You just need to find the way that feels good for you and comfortable. And that's really important, is that it's comfortable. Because if you're comfortable, you'll do a really good job. Along with practice, it'll work out nice. So I'm just kind of blending it, making sure that my shadow value, I want to kind of match these value senses here onto my object.